Today, I'm joined by a seasoned homicide detective to talk about the evolution of interview and interrogation techniques. We'll unpack how modern, science based methods are replacing outdated tactics, and why building rapport isn't just kind, but it's strategic. Forget the tough guy act. In today's world, being human first is often the smartest move in the room. Let's get into the conversation and the real work of getting to the truth. This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. Dr. Shaun Sylvester is an active member of law enforcement, having served over 20 years across two different agencies as a probation officer, police officer, detective, homicide division trainer, and an instructor. Detective Sylvester has researched science-based interview and interrogation training and has led to his dissertation and earning of his PhD in forensic psychology. He has developed and implemented multiple science-based courses on investigative interviewing and presented to multiple law enforcement agencies. Shaun Sylvester also has presented at international conferences on investigative interviewing, as a member of the American Psychological Association, the Society for Police and Criminal Psychology, and a current member of the European Cost Action Implemendes research group. Let's hear directly from Shaun on how science meets practice in some of the most difficult investigations. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. I'm here with Detective Shaun Sylvester, comma PhD. I want to talk about both of those. It's unique. You see somebody with both of those. You got letters in the front and the back of their name. But thanks for joining and hanging out with me today.
Thanks, appreciate it.
I gotta ask you first because it's probably a bit unique. But you getting these academic experience and going back to get a doctorate as a detective with some pretty extensive experience. What drove that decision in the first place?
Well, I mean, for that, it was, I was in a unique position when I started with Homicide. I've been there now, coming up on December, it'll be 14 years. And when I got into Homicide, the experience was 20 plus years to my 0 years. And so I learned the good and the bad. I saw what real seasoned veterans were capable of doing and what they were capable of doing positively and maybe in a negative way. And, I saw, as you saw, I saw the way interviews were being done. I attempted to try, I took all the courses. I took the accusatorial method courses. I tried all those little ploys and found out that those don't work. And I learned that something needed to change. And so it prompted me to look for something I could bring to the table for at least my division and maybe more to change the way we do things and give us a better chance at talking to people and looking for things that may, lead you down a different path, if not to solidify who you have in front of you. And it kind of led me to actually speaking to some people overseas and figuring out that forensic psychology was where I needed to be. That was the program I needed most of all. And, I could choose that path. I could choose that as my research study, which helped out a lot.
I know. I'm wondering if you had the same problem when I first started learning about evidence-based interviewing or whatever. Trying to figure out, all right, what does that mean and where do I find the research? And then I'm looking at research and half the research papers disagree with each other. And so
Yeah.
for me, it was like, how the hell am I supposed to know what research to follow? Did you struggle with that in the beginning before you got into the doctorate program?
I struggled a lot. And what helped me out was I said to myself, I've got to figure out how to get the right information. And I figured, well, you know what? Over in Great Britain, they've been doing the same program since 90, 92, 93, somewhere around there. 94 is when they solidified things. I started sending emails out. I sent out to the UK College of Policing. I sent out to a police department out there that I heard was a good place to start. And the funny thing is that I that's how I met James Harris, who I introduced introduced to you, and he told me a wealth of information that helped me out because he was actually one of those trainers that was able to explain it to me in a better, light than I was just reading. And then it was hard to see who was actually helping in that area here. I know you changed the program from what, I took the original program back years and years ago. But I know your program's changed too. But that was where I had my breakthrough, was trying to reach other people. And then I reached Saul Casson here actually, and that's how I met you, was through Saul, which was an interesting way to end up meeting you and talking to you about the whole process.
Yeah, well, what's really cool is people. So James Harris is an incredible, incredible guy.
Yeah,
And he was on. We had him on an episode actually earlier this year talking about um, kind of witness interviewing, strategic interviewing, trauma on interviewers, which was pretty cool. And then what's really neat about Saul Casson is one of the people that I credit to, like, personally for me, mentoring on what does the research say about interview interrogation, what's the impact that we can have. But what's kind of neat is to have somebody in his space, a PhD expert in false confessions interrogations, connect two practitioners like you and I.
yeah.
And but I think that's what's cool, and that's what you're doing, right? Is trying to bridging this gap between practitioner and academic space.
Yeah, and it's a hard space to be in though too at the same time. And I feel your pain on it, because that's your I've heard you say that many times, you're bridging that gap, and I really appreciate the work you do, because it's really tough. After teaching the classes for so many years now, I actually take away from every class something new that, hey, I need to change something, because I see how are they taking that information in? How are they absorbing it? Are they absorbing what I'm saying? I started out in a more, I was a college professor too, part time, for a few years with TSU, and I approached it as an academic standpoint, and that wasn't the approach to do with law enforcement. They looked at me kind of like, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
I'm just regurgitating the research instead of putting it in a light that they can understand. Because a lot of times, you mentioned things like rapport development, and I'd have officers say, "Great, you tell me develop rapport, develop rapport, develop rapport, develop rapport, but how?" They want
Right.
to know how, and that's what you and I are finding. And what we do is, it's that they need to know the how. You can show them the research, but they want to know how to put it into practice. So we do things like, one of my exercises is s- essentially telling them to pick somebody else in that room that they don't know. And I want them to learn at least one. I wanted them to learn three, but I've learned three is kind of tough. But I want them to learn one unique thing about that individual using my prompts I give up on the board. And I want them to report back. And that unique thing can't be, they got kids and they have a cat and all this. It's got to be something unique. I take away from every class. It's still funny. Some of them say, "This is my new best friend," or, "I learned this about this person. This is amazing. I didn't know they did this. This is awesome." It's so many different things, and they learn, they take away, because they want to know what is empathy. What is it to be genuinely curious about people? What is it to experience that? And to know that they need to look within if they want to get engagement with that person. They have to look inside and say, "What am I doing in this encounter that maybe I should change? Maybe it's my body language, my tone of voice, my inflection. What am I doing that's offsetting this engagement that I need?" Because it's essentially our responsibility as the interviewer to get engagement with the individual. It's not theirs. We can't force them. That's the old school. "Hey, you're going to talk to me," but no, we're not doing that. We need to get engagement.
Right. When you talk about rapport and empathy, I hear this all the time. So I'm curious, especially with your homicide background, is I hear well, with certain people we can't be soft, right? We have to go in with this authority, and we got to go in and be bold, which we know the
Mhm.
research doesn't support that. But I'm curious, direct from the source. So somebody's dealing with some pretty difficult cases and training people on those cases. How do you see that rapport and empathy are more effective than maybe this confrontational approach?
So much more. I get so much more out of anyone that I talk to if I go in the room and I introduce myself. "Hey, I'm Shaun. I'm Shaun. What do you want to be called?" "Hey, John." "Hey, Dave." "Yeah, Dave. I know this is really tough. I really do. I've been doing this for a minute. I know. you're stressed out, you need something, I try to attend to their needs. I try to understand what's going on. I tell a story where I messed up. I like to tell my mistakes because, I want them to know that the trainer's not somebody that's infallible. I go in the room and I tell them in class, hey, let me tell you about a mistake I made. I walk in the room and for some reason or another, this guy just does not want to talk to me. I'm first chair, so to speak. I'm the one up front. My partner's kind of sitting back, and I luckily think to myself, I don't know what I'm doing, but I need to excuse myself. So I excuse myself. I say, you know what? I need to go step out. Let my partner deal with this. A couple hours go by, nothing's coming out of this conversation. I go back in because my partner's frustrated. He's frustrated. And I say to him, hey, man, are you okay? He's like, yeah. I say, hey, you know what? I don't know what I did earlier, but are you all right? You look down. I don't need to know what y'all were talking about. I don't need to know anything. I want to know, can I help you? You need to go to the restroom. You need a drink of water. What do you need? What is it that's going on? And I think being human for a moment gave him the opportunity to I don't know how to really say the word. He broke down and he just came up and he's like, man, I'm scared. I'm scared these guys are gonna hurt me or kill me. And I can't make promises to him, but I'm like, I understand. I'm sorry you're going through this. I feel you on that. I said, and we talked for a few moments, and me just absorbing that from him gave him the opportunity to say, you know what, I want to help you. And I said, okay, let's talk about it. What do you know? And it helped.
I think that's great. A lot of people confuse, rapport and empathy because, old school empathy was maybe translated into making promises or suggesting
Yeah.
leniency. And what you just described, I like, is we're talking, and I've heard this a lot, even in the medical field, of like needs-based rapport. So maybe like a sexual assault nurse examiner who's got somebody coming in, a victim of a crime, and it's less about the situation that they experience or the bad decision that somebody made, and it's more about like what do they need right now? Is it how can I make somebody feel comfortable right now so they're easier to discuss kind of uncomfortable information.
And you know what? The funny, I don't say, I mean, the word funny is not what to use, but the interesting thing about it is you may need to give them a hug. Some people need a hug. And, I have yet to leave an encounter where there's a few times when they're mad at me, but they shake my hand and I'm like, I'm sorry. This is what's going to happen. I tell them, I say, hey, you know what? Up front, I'm following the format. I tell them, I'm going to talk to you about what's going to happen as we go along. I want to give them as much information as possible because I don't want them to not talk to me. So I say, hey, I could share with you as much as possible, but it's an ongoing investigation. There's some things I may not be able to talk to you about, but I will tell you everything I possibly can once I understand what your perspective of what happened is. Because I don't want to cloud that and I explain all that issue. But then I tell them after we're done, I'll explain the next process. I want you to understand what's going to happen next. And I'll tell them, hey, you're going to go to Joint Processing Center. You're going to go before the judge. You're going to receive a bond. And from there, it's up to you how that goes. And, because you are being charged with whatever it may be. And I have them shake my hand. I've had them say, hey, can I have a hug? I have yet to leave too many encounters where they're totally irritated with me, where, they just won't say anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty important. And what you're again going through, like when you said earlier, rapport, what the hell does that mean? And so one of the things you just described with the research supports is being transparent and empowering somebody. And so I always compared it to like if you're going to go maybe have surgery or something like outpatient surgery and you got to go into the doctor that morning, you're probably going to get a visit from the nurse and the anesthesiologist and the recovery nurse and the doctor, the surgeon, and they're going to tell you, here's everything that's going to happen today. So you feel more part of the process and more informed. And that's pretty much what you just described in a different context.
Yeah, I mean, I show the study that they have about the first few words that are said on a traffic stop. Why does the encounter go wrong and how can it go right? And I try to put that in a context of how we deal with it. I mean, if we walk in the door and say, hey, I'm Detective Sylvester, I need to read read your rights, and then I could talk to you. Well, pretty much, if I were me, I'd be like, okay, I don't want to talk to you because I don't know what you want to talk to me about, and there we go. That's it. We've
Right.
ended the interview.
Right. Right. So yeah, having, I mean, even you saying like, here's what I'm going to do next to the most that you can. I think it was also important that you said, you know, I'm going to share as much information as I can because I think that's the other struggle investigators get into. I see this a lot in homicide cases, so I'm curious what you've seen, but where detectives leak information about the case in the interrogation. So maybe they talk about details of the crime scene or the weapon or how the victim's body was found or whatever it might be. That's now contaminating what that person is going to kind of parrot back to you. But what does that mean to you, or how do you kind of teach around that concept?
I think that speaks to a lack of preparation and planning in a sense, because and I explained to them, hey, you need to talk with your partner. If you don't have a partner, have somebody help you out, have somebody watching the interview, and talk about what you're going to do. How are you going to deal with it? What are you going to do when they don't talk? What are you going to disclose? I talk a little bit about, I talk about the Sue technique in the advanced course we have, and when is it good to disclose evidence, and the fact that it's easy for any individual in a conversation to, as Saul says it in a video clip I show of Saul, where he talks about leaking information. We want to help in a conversation all the time. Just like you and I, we know each other, and we may help each other through a sentence if I'm forgetting one word or whatever it may be. I think that kind of plays into an interview in a very inadvertent way, where they don't pay attention to it, but they don't even realize that that's happening. And that's why a lot of times what I tell them is, hey, you have to think of the end product. We have to think of, how is this going to play out in court? When they play that video, are you contaminating that by giving them non-public facts of the crime? Or are you allowing them? Because one of the first upfront things that I teach about planning preparation, then we get to engage and explain, just like in peace, and we get to the narrative. I call it the narrative clarification and challenge. In that narrative, I tell them you have to get a free narrative from them. You have to flesh out that narrative, go back, clarify what they said using their own language, their own words. You have to use interviewee compatible words and phrases, stuff they said. And the really, I think where you're going with it, I think sometimes where I see the biggest mistake is trying to make the timeline fit your timeline, not their timeline. If their memory is out of whack, go with their memory. Don't correct their memory. You have to go with that, because if you try to correct it, you're not going to get the right information. And then you may do that. You may leak out information, because then you're helping them, because maybe you think it's already said, or if it's common knowledge, whereas you're not following that timeline they gave. They may go 1, 3, 4, 5, 2, when it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you want to put it back where it belongs. That kind of, defeats the purpose, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, now it's your story and not their story. Right.
Yeah,
That's yeah.
yeah.
I say it all the time. And now it's hard because even if you have a person, a guilty person who is responsible for whatever it was, but if you've altered the way that they tell their story or you fact fed, the reliability of the information is shot. So it's, we've talked, I mean, I do a lot with the false confession space. So it's not just protecting to get false confessions. It's when we get a good confession that's true. How do we also make sure it's reliable and it's going to hold up in court? And that's one of the things that comes up all the time is this fact feeding of information.
I think law enforcement, I'm just saying in general what I've seen, and, what I've observed over the years is that a lot of times we don't think about the end result, because officers may not go to court, maybe not almost their entire career, maybe not for years. They could become an investigator in homicide and maybe not even get to court within 2 to 3 years of starting. So in those 2 to 3 year space, they could be committing the same mistake in that 2 to 3 year space over that span. And by the time they go to court, they've made this mistake so many times, it's become habit. Now you got to go back and unlearn that habit that you've developed, because that habit may be detrimental to whatever investigation you had. So
Yeah.
you've got to unlearn some of these behaviors. So it's kind of hard. It's just like the learning curve too. They go through this learning curve. Because I sit in on a lot of interviews, And one of the things, you and I talk about rapport development, and we talk about, you don't have to read Miranda right away. You can develop rapport. We're not going to talk about facts of the case. We're not going to talk about facts of the crime. I can talk about the mechanics of the case. I could talk about what it's about, but as far as sharing like vital information, then that becomes when I'm asking those pertinent questions, I need to read Miranda. But what I see sometimes is I train about rapport, but when an officer first gets out the gate by themselves, and they'll ask me to come sit in, I've had a lot of times where they'll go right in the room, and we've prepared. I'm like, okay, are you ready? Do you have all your questions you need to have answered? I'm gonna let you do what you want to do. I'm just gonna sit there and be the help, and the first thing they do, hey, I'm Detective so and so. I need to read you your rights. And then we can get started. And then I'm like, and they go through and read the rights. And then the person's like, no, I don't want to talk to you. And I'm like, hold up a second.
Right.
Let's go back.
Right.
I'm going to tell you why you're here first. And it's like, so they go through this learning curve so there's all kinds of different ways I've seen these things happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point because looking at that end product as you said it, how do you think we fix that? How do we, like, if agencies are listening, because that's a good point. You got a lot of patrol officers that are kind of the first line of an interview potentially, and then you
Mhm.
got maybe a detective who isn't testifying about a case until maybe years into their detective career. So how do we fix that across law enforcement?
I think we need peer review. I mean, we see it, you and I've seen it in the research we see from overseas in Europe. They have peer review, and it's a hard thing for us to do. I think, I've had to get used to it when I did when I went through PhD. My wife was kind of my critic, and it was tough sometimes. I argued with her, hey, but I have to tell them, hey, the end result, your name is the one that's on that. It's not theirs. So if you ask me a question, it doesn't matter, what, if I'm right or you're right. What matters is you got the question answered you need. Your name goes on that. You're the one that gets credit for it. I don't get credit for it. So when you ask somebody to peer review something, I mean, it's credit towards you. And I think that it's hard for us to receive credit. I mean, a critique sometimes. I think that's really tough for a lot of us, and especially with officers, they don't want to be critiqued. And I think if you do that, it's a catch-all. It saves you. If my lieutenant helps me, or a peer helps me, whoever it may be, it only makes me stronger and them stronger. It only helps both of us.
Yeah. I think this is a good area to spend some time on because when you talk about like the peace model and that last part of peace of evaluate, which is this critique. And this applies on, we got a lot of listeners that don't even do interviews or interrogations, but they do job interviews for people, or they do investigative interviews, or they do sales, or they do whatever it might be. But the critique part after, my my concern, I'm curious what you think, is so many people, even supervisors, when they critique somebody, they're looking at more of an outcomes based critique, which is a problem. And what I mean by that is, well, did did Shaun get a confession? Did this person
Hmm.
make the sale? Did this person get the detail? When it's I feel like it's possible, yeah, they got the end result, but they did it in a terrible way. Or maybe they minimize the scope of how much more information they could get. So I don't know if you see that, but when we talk about evaluation, if I'm a supervisor out there, what should I actually be looking at if I'm going to critique somebody's interview?
Well, I read a lot of the leadership books and things like that. I know you have, and I know, you want to give the good and the bad at the same time, but I think that does help. I mean, you want to tell them, hey, you did these things really good. These are really good things. They may be things that maybe we need to have other people focus on, but there's some things here that you might want to work on. Like I said, I myself don't have an issue with receiving a criticism like that, because it actually, there are things I just don't think of. It's just my perspective is different from your perspective, which is different from that other person's perspective. And just getting that third party that's on the outside looking in saying, hey, I saw it differently. And it's like, damn, I didn't even think about that. Kind of like I go back to that guy that wouldn't talk to me at first. At the end, I did something that I talk about in class, after evaluation. After you evaluate what information you have, is to go back in and get an evaluation from them. asked them, hey, what, and I literally did. I said, hey, what did I do when I first came in that turned you off from me? I mean, I know I'm not blaming you, I'm blaming myself. Something I did, it just irritated you about me, and I just need to know so I can fix that. And he's like, dude, it's just the way you looked at me and the way you spoke to me when you first walked in. I was like, something I got to think about.
Yeah. Well, especially I think, I mean, everybody goes through emotions throughout their day and throughout their week, but especially people in a first responder role, right? I mean, you could be coming from one crazy situation to another, and you're carrying that with you sometimes. And let alone
Yeah.
you could be having a fight with your significant other or something else on the backside. And so now, yeah, when you walk in that room, that's important. Is how do you, I guess, control that um, your emotion walking into a pretty sensitive, high pressure interview on a homicide case, but you got 400 other things going on in your head. How do you get yourself in the right state of mind for those conversations?
I mean, honestly, I focus on that. I focus on what we need to accomplish. Do we have the right person? I mean, that's one of the things I've gone in there from day one is, do I have the right person? Are they going to say the things that have the information I need that says this is the person I need to talk to? Not even being the guilty party. Is this somebody that has valuable information? I mean, is it somebody that, has what information would prove what I need? Things of that nature. I want to focus on them. I want to focus on the investigation itself. So I drown everything else out, and I don't have my phone. I mean, I've got video clips of some of the investigators that will be on their phone or they'll text. And there's one in particular, I can't remember the lady's name, but she zipped up her significant other in a suitcase, and they were interviewing. She killed him, and basically they're interviewing her, and she becomes extremely volatile because she sees them continuing to text and check their phones. And that's some of the things I try not to do. Hey, don't interrupt me during the interview. So I want to focus just on what I have in front of me.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I talked to a guy years ago who was committing credit card fraud. He was like installing credit card skimmers at gas station pumps across the country and stealing credit cards. And he when he got arrested, he gets interrogated, he gets convicted, and then part of the investigation is they wanted him to snitch on other people involved. And eventually he does, but he described to me two different contexts of an interview. And one in which he gave a bunch of information about other people's names, the other he didn't give up names. I kind of asked him why. And the one where he didn't give up any names, he explained that the investigator had their phone, like they were on their phone actively during the interview. And so in his mind, they were typing down names. Here's who this guy said, and he felt like this is going to come back to me, and there's going to be retaliation. He said the other interview, the guy just didn't take notes, didn't have anything in front of him. He just talked to him. And he said he felt so much more comfortable because he felt like he knew the information was going to go somewhere, but he felt like it was just less, I don't know, tangible of being traced
Hmm.
back to him. But I thought that was really, really interesting is how much people are reading into that simple behavior.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing about people is you don't know. you know, Sometimes I think we discount people, certain people. We may discount people that have mental health or IDD or juveniles, but those are the most perceptive individuals there are. They're watching because they need to protect themselves. They need to know what's coming next. And that behavior is just interesting. I show a video in the class. It's a Wired video, and I believe his name's Jim Clemente. He's an FBI agent, retired out of the BAU with the FBI, and he talks about this. He shows a clip of the Scott Peterson interview where the interviewer literally sat there and had his head down and he was jotting notes and disregarded the things that were being said and how they were being said and the mannerisms they were being said with, and just totally disregarded. I tend to tell him, I'm like, hey, you know what? This is being recorded, or I'm going to record this. I need to because I want to take notes later. I don't want to take notes now. I want to give you my undivided attention. You deserve my undivided attention because I think what you have to say is important. And so I need to have that. I need to look. We need to have this conversation. And so to do that, I'm going to record it. Later on, I'll go back and take notes. Right now, I'm not taking notes. And then
Yeah.
even have somebody in the other room that's watching the video be that person to take the notes, because that's when you go for the evaluation, when you say, hey, you know what? I need to we need to step out. Do you need some coffee? You need to go to the restroom. I'm gonna go to the restroom, talk to my partner real quick, and I'll come back in. That's when you go out and you ask that partner, hey, what didn't I ask? What did I ask? What do I need to ask? What did he say that maybe I need to go back and reflect on? Did something stand out? That's the evaluation to me.
I think that's really good. And I mean, now thankfully we've got a lot of departments recording, which as you mentioned is so helpful because then you don't like the cognitive load of the investigator. You don't have to think about it.
Mm,
What did that person just say? I got to remember that. You can go back and look at it afterwards. But I want because we talked a little bit about behavior there, and notes is a good example. If you're giving me an answer, right, and I start to jot it down, that might tell you, hey, that's you've given me enough. That's enough information because I'm writing it. So you've hit what I needed you to write. Or maybe it's scary information or it's good
mhm.
information. And so I know there's all this focus, and this is part of the changes that we've talked about, is getting away from observing somebody's behavior and not necessarily observing, getting away from classifying somebody's behavior as deceptive or truthful.
Oh yeah.
But I'm wondering how much, and we can talk more about it, but how much of that do you think is based off of our behavior in the first place, right? Somebody's reacting to us.
Mirroring. You've read a lot about mirroring, emotive mirroring, and mirroring in general. I mean, it's a way to get engagement. I mean, we do it naturally to become, you know, part of the conversation, so to speak. We want to mirror the other group members to fit in. And that's something we're always going to try to do or attempt to do. And, it's so funny you mentioned that, because when I first started the interview and interrogation teaching, that I was kind of forced to add a couple things in that you'll probably laugh at right now when I say it. I was forced to add in NLP, the eye movement. And I said, okay, fine, I'll add that in, but I'm going to debunk it because my mentor for my dissertation, she that was one of her first papers, was that's not going to happen because eye movement does not track with that. But they're so caught up in it. So I do talk about body language a little bit, but I love to show a lot of Joe Navarro when it comes to that, because Joe talks more about, psychological discomfort versus looking for those behaviors. Why are they doing that? I love one of the stories he talks about the lady that was fidgeting, doing all these clear indications of deceptive behavior. And he says, ma'am, are you okay? And she's like, no, I'm glad you asked, because I forgot to feed the meter downstairs and I think I'm going to get a ticket. And
Right.
here she made all the indicators that she might have been guilty of whatever it was. Turns out she wasn't after all. But that focus is so interesting because a lot of agencies are stuck on that. We have to focus. I mean, that's too much. And that's too much for us as an interviewer to have to sit there and evaluate everything all at one time. We
Yeah.
have to evaluate eye movement, hand movement, whether they're fidgeting in a chair, or how they have their feet, all those things. I mention it, but I don't talk about it as something that they need to look at for deception. Just look at it as, where is it coming from? What's the context of it? Why did they do it? Did you say something? Maybe it's a victim and you said something very uncomfortable and they displayed some uncomfortable body language movements that you maybe need to stay away from for a moment, or maybe it's a suspect. Maybe you need to double down on the information, but it's not a deceptive indicator at all.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's the point. The point is don't close your eyes, right? Observe but when you classify and then use it, that fuels almost confirmation bias of, okay, I think
Mhm.
this person's guilty, and now they stop looking at me, so they feel even more guilty. But to me, it's like you and I, last time I saw you, we were at the psychology law conference, and we could be sitting at the bar, right? And somebody's wanting to talk to us, and you can tell when somebody doesn't want to talk anymore, or they want to talk even more, or they're distracted. That's just normal kind of communication. But this
Yeah.
concept of, hey, this person's lying to me, because especially like in your space, right? If you're talking in homicide cases, I would imagine there's a lot more witnesses you're interviewing than you are suspects, right? There's a lot of other
Yeah.
people. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
a witness, I would imagine in some of these cases might have the same physical behavioral cues that the suspect might have, but for completely different reasons.
Almost definitely. I mean, one of the main factors, we have to get over is what criminal behavior they are committing, and I have to tell them, I'm not here for whatever that is. I'm here for your partner that died. I need to know what happened. Regardless of you guys were smoking marijuana, whatever it may be, that is not the focal point of my investigation.
Right.
But they still think that, and it's something I have to overcome. Is like, how do I overcome that nervousness that, hey, he's gonna do something. I can't just tell him that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So their potential guilty looking behavior is completely unrelated to the reason that you're there.
Yeah, they could be for something totally different, and I have to explain to them, hey, I'm here for you, buddy. I'm not here for that.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand whatever that was is not right. We know, but we need to talk about what happened.
Yeah. Or completely innocent and they're just freaking out because they're in custody talking to a detective with a badge and a gun, and that's scary.
True. That's
Right.
why you
Yeah.
shouldn't wear any of that in the room.
There you go. Good.
Don't wear any of that in the room.
Yeah. How so in this kind of theme of change, right? And I know we've shared some of these examples. So there's a lot of things that have changed. We talked about behavior, the way we develop rapport, the way we handle resistance, the way you withhold evidence. A lot of these kind of concepts have changed. What's been the pushback that you've seen, maybe earlier till now, when you're trying to implement change with practitioners who've maybe been doing this for a long?
It's funny. I'm glad you mentioned that because, like, when I first started teaching, as the things you've encountered, we're used to the accusatorial method, and so I had people over me that was what they knew and or heard of, and they thought that should happen. So here I am with this totally new concept, interview that's based on science, and I don't, they look at it like, oh, that's great, but I don't know what you're talking about. So they filled my classes with uh, seasoned veterans. But the weird thing is, I get these seasoned veterans. They're like, man, this is pretty good. They're actually looking at it like, okay, I do almost all this already. I just didn't think about some of the other concepts. And it's interesting that I didn't get the pushback that I thought I would when I first started. Instead, I got a lot more buy-in. It was very, very interesting that the buy-in happened a lot more because they saw, hey, you know what? That actually makes sense.
Yeah, I've seen the same. I think the initial resistance is, we got to learn about science and interviewing, or we're going to do this softer. But then once,
Yeah, like, oh, it's foo-foo. I don't know about
right.
that. Hug a thug. I don't think
Yeah.
I could do that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. But then there's this kind of like revelation of, wait a second, this is actually normal. This is how you should talk to people. And what's crazy too, that people don't realize that may be struggling with the change here is it feels like when you remove the accusatory approach and you go to the science-based approach that you're gonna, yes, you're protecting from false confessions, hopefully, and you're being more humane, but oh great, we're not going to get as many admissions. But that's not the case either. The research has shown that we're actually getting even more information by doing it this way. And that should
You
be the
know,
that should be the win.
and it's interesting because, like, I just finished the child forensic interviewer class, and they mentioned the alternative hypothesis, and Hector Campos mentioned it in his speech, and it was interesting because we don't think about that. We think about it, but a lot of people don't think, do I really have that person? Is this really what happened? Or is it something else? Because you can go in that room, and if you don't have your own direction you want to take it, you want to go with the interviewee compatible direction, then you may learn something totally new about what happened. It may be totally different from what you understood it to be or what you theorized it to be. And I thought that was interesting. That was a good takeaway I had from their class.
That's a great mindset because I was going to ask you if you feel like you have experienced confirmation bias at all in your career, and this kind of alternative hypothesis is it tries to mitigate that, right? You're trying to go into something thinking, what are the reasons I could be wrong, essentially. But have you ever felt like you fell victim to confirmation bias, where you're like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah. I have. What helps me is watching my own videos that I play about that, because that's one of the first things that I have in a class is we talk about implicit bias, confirmation bias, and tunnel vision. And Jim Trainum does one of the videos I play, and he talks about tunnel vision and how that confirmation bias plays into it. And he talks about how we're all guilty of it, and I am too. I mean, I could, go in thinking one thing, but I'm keeping that open mind. But I think what's helped me a lot more lately is because I'm a trainer and being asked to go in or asked to help out with the investigation, so to speak. Since I'm not the case agent, I'm going in there with that mindset, like, hey, I'm open and I'm listening to the whole scenario. I'm listening in the background and I'm contributing at the end, but I'm there listening to the whole thing and taking everything in. So I'm thinking about the plausible alternative, what if this is different from what it
Yeah.
sounded kind of a little bit different now.
It's crazy because that the spirit of what your role is, and right, with law enforcement is to be inquisitive, right? Is to investigate. But then sometimes when we come up with our own theory, we fail to investigate it. It's more like
Yeah.
it has to be what I think it is versus, well, wait, what reasons could I be wrong? Why could this eyewitness be wrong? Why might this evidence be wrong? And always having that kind of secondary thought process.
Yeah, because it's sad. I mean, it still happens. I teach courtroom testimony, and I show the movie Murder on a Sunday Morning and how they made the crime fit that young man, and that was pretty sad how it happened. But it still happens to this day in certain things. I mean, my partner and I, we go and consult sometimes, and we see things that, hey, this is not the way you said it was. This is a
Yeah.
little bit different. We need to fix this.
Yeah. You mentioned Jim Trainum, so I will, just because if people are listening, I'm going to link in the show notes. Jim wrote a great book, "How Police Generate False Confessions," I believe is the title. And as a former homicide detective himself, he talks about his own experience. Really, just incredibly humble, great
Oh yeah.
to learn from. So we'll link that 'cause that's a good one. What I'm curious about, so we talked about some of the practical changes, how you're delivering the change through training. I'm curious what the reception is like from, not from just the investigators, which we talked about, but more so from maybe prosecutors you've worked with or who see a difference, and the public, the community, if they've seen any kind of, if there's any interaction with them as to how law enforcement's handling cases now versus maybe how they did in the past.
I don't think it's really reflected in a big way, if you mean by that. I think I'm seeing it in smaller increments still because it's still new. It's still new, and a lot of those cases are still coming up from court. A lot of times, the chiefs know. I know the chiefs, DAs in my area, so they'll know that we've changed our system. Some still don't, and we have a lot of new district attorneys, so they may not know that we do interviewing that way because for some reason, well, not for some reason, the reasons. I mean, the media, movies, television, they paint this picture that we go in there and we try to seek a confession so hard that I think that fear when it gets to court is, what did this investigator do in this interview process? What do I need to fix or what do I not need to show? Because years ago I was being told, hey, we're not going to play the interview. And I'm like, why aren't you going to play the interview? And it's like, because now I know it's not good. And it's like they haven't even looked at it, and that was sad. But I'm getting more buy-in, like especially now. I try to work closely with them. I'm working on a juvenile. Well, the only way to say it is juvenile interview and interrogation. I'm labeling it adolescent and young adult because they don't finish developing till the age of 25. The brain
Right.
doesn't. So I built in a lot of neuropsychology, psychology into the course already. But I'm getting buy-in from the juvenile DAs. So I talk to them and I'm like, now I have to present some information. I want to see whether I'm on the right path with the legal aspects of it and the other aspects of it to make sure it's fitting what they want to see in court, what they can work with. Because it could be great research wise, but is it something they can work with when it goes to court? That's my concern.
Yeah, I think you
So
brought two good things. One, you just made Haley Cleary very happy. A mutual friend of ours. Haley was
yeah.
a guest on one of the early episodes, a developmental psychologist, and if I say the word juvenile, she'll slap me virtually through the screen because, as you said, we're looking at like developmental maturity. But the other thing that's interesting from a media standpoint is I think you also have a more skeptical and educated juror. in today's world because of
Yes.
Netflix and Hulu and all, Amazon Prime and all these uh, documentaries where they're highlighting wrongful conviction cases and interrogations done from years ago. And so, yeah, I think it's a good example. You say we don't want to show the video because it's going to get attacked. We know it's not good. We're now in today's space. Hopefully, it's let's show the whole video. It should be a win for the entire courtroom working group, really.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. It's interesting that, it's hopefully that we get more buy-in from that aspect. I know you and I have talked about where else can we get buy-in. I think the other buy-in that we need, that we really absolutely need, is command staff from departments, because I think a lot of times command staff, and not any criticism of that at all, managerial wise. I have some great managers, but they may not have the experience in investigations to know that these are the way we do things. So other departments may not know. They may be, hey, this is the way we've done it. This has always been as it is, and this is what I see. So why are we going to change it?
Right.
So we've got to get buy-in from a lot of different places. I think our command staff for our departments and our district attorneys, would enhance what we do in the public. Because I think, for the most part, we always talk about community-oriented policing. Everybody talks about community-oriented policing. I think interview and interrogation, we call it interview and interrogation. I like to call it interview, but we call it that because just like with juvenile, we have to label it somehow for everybody to understand. But I think when you talk about that in the space of investigative interviewing, that's community oriented policing. How do we interact with the public? I tell them, hey, most of the time now I'm getting patrol officers, and it's awesome. I tell them, please take my course. They're the first line investigator. They're the one that needs to establish themselves with the public. I want them to be out there, and I tell them, hey, would you rather be that person? You may be getting yelled at, called all kinds of names by every person in your beat, but you keep pushing. You keep telling them, hey, you know what? I'm here. I'm here, showing you're there, telling you want to talk to them. And eventually they're going to say, you know what? Go seek out that person, or if you get pushback from another person, they may protect you. I was a probation officer for 10 years, and I worked with sex offenders. And, you know, I, my expectation was that they do their court ordered conditions. I didn't ask them to do anything more. I worked with them. I treated them with respect. They're individuals. And because of that, when I started getting younger determinate sentencing cases come over before I left, they were giving me more issues. And because of my demeanor with my people, and this is the example I give them, my demeanor with my people that I've established a relationship with in group, because they all had to go to therapy, they would police my problem child.
Huh.
They would actually say, hey, you know what? You need to come correct. He takes care of business, and that's all he expects. So you need to come correct. And they would actually protect, me from having more problems because of that. So I
Yeah.
tell them that's what your public could be. Your public could be your information source. It could be the people that go to you or send people or say, hey, stop talking to that guy like that. That guy's a good guy.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because I mean, right now police community relations are just it struggles sometimes, and
Oh yeah.
when especially in homicide, you're probably dealing with some frequent flyers where you're interviewing the same people often, right? And if you use the false evidence ploy, if you lie to somebody about
Oh
evidence,
yeah.
what is that going to do for the interview 6 months from now or 3 years from now, right? Your trust and your credibility shot as an investigator.
I mean, Fraser v. Cup, we all know it. It says that we can use deception in the interview room. And I tell them, you can use deception in the interview room, but if you truly have the suspect in the interview room and you try to use some false information that could be totally false, it could be detrimental, or it could be a method of engagement. We talk about Cunningham's law and how do you get engagement? And they, in education, I like what they do. They'll say the wrong thing to get the right answer. So maybe they're telling kids, hey, they have animals, and they show a picture of a giraffe and say, that's an elephant. And all the kids are like, no, it's not. That's a giraffe. And so what did they get? Engagement. I've tried it. I had a guy that he did not like women. The two investigators that went before him, he treated them really badly. He thought he was the smartest man in the world. So I wasn't getting engagement from him. I was getting him doing this. and I'm talking to him. So I continued to talk, and I told my partner, I said, hey, before we go in there, let's figure out what we need to do. Hey, he's not going to talk. Why don't we use one of the other employees? Why don't we just say something wrong, and see what he says? So I said, hey, I told him a few things that were right. I said, hey, there was blood in the trunk. He didn't say anything. He just looking around. I said, there was blood in the other item that we found. I said, and there may have been blood on the wall in the apartment. He goes, nope, no, there wasn't. You're a liar. I can tell you that right now. And I'm like, oh, I said, I'm sorry. I didn't say there was. I said, there may have been. I got engagement from that point forward. He sat up, he looked at me, and after the interview, he continued to call me from the jail.
Hmm.
That's how
Yeah.
weird that can
Criminal
happen.
dialogue. Yeah. I'm gonna just get a couple quick questions so I don't take up your whole time. I'll give you a couple quick one liner type answers, but I'm just curious, since you're working with a lot of either new detectives or new officers, what do you think is the most just underdeveloped skill that you're seeing right now in law enforcement?
Rapport
Yeah.
is knowing how to develop rapport, genuine rapport. Communication skills are a little bit diminished sometimes, or nervousness up front to speak to someone.
I would imagine we're seeing that from all levels of law enforcement, from patrol up.
Yeah, and it's just knowing that, hey, it's your responsibility to make that, to do the to establish engagement with that person. You have to do that. It's not the other way around.
Right. What do you think? We talked a little about the media and what people perceive interrogations in quotes to look like. What's a myth about interrogation that if you could educate the entire public about that you'd like to disappear?
There's a lot. Uh, the biggest one, uh, man, there's so many. I'm trying to think of the one I would think of up
Go
front.
for a few if you want.
Well, I mean, a few of them are that we try to trick people. That we're just playing mind games. And then, if I even remotely mention that I have a psychology background, and it's like, oh no, and it's like, no, that's one of the biggest reasons, not the biggest, that I go in saying my name's Shaun. I don't say, you know, I, I can't remember who I heard this from, but it's one of the videos I play where you talk about, you want to go in personable. I want to separate myself from the company, the department, and my title. I want to be a person to that person.
Right. Yeah, as soon as you say I've got a psych or forensic psych background, now they think you're playing like Mindhunter with these people.
Yeah, and that's not the case.
Yeah.
That's not the case.
Yeah.
But being genuine, the other thing is you got to be genuine with people. You have to have a genuine curiosity for people and just be genuine with them. And people pick up on falseness. They really do.
What do you think if you were in charge of all funding for law enforcement across the country, what's the resource or resources that you would first invest in? What do cops need to be better supported right now?
Communication, I think that would solve a lot of different issues. The interview and interrogation is part of it, but the biggest part is communication. It would solve a lot of high risk situations that we find ourselves in because of our behavior or the way we think we have to control everything.
Right. I know it's crazy. People don't realize how much we expect law enforcement to be experts in everything, right? Like you
Oh
got to be
yeah.
a mental health expert, you got to be a tactical expert, defensive tactics expert, you got to be a firearms expert. It's everything somehow. And I'd feel in the training space, we just don't give officers the training to be experts in all of those categories.
No, I mean, and that's the thing. And the expectation, I think the officer feels that expectation. They feel it, and it causes a lot of stress in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right, last question. We talked a lot about the changes. I mean, if you even think about interviewing 10 years ago versus today, there's a whole bunch of differences. What do you think might be coming next that maybe you're slowly adapting into the training now or you feel like is coming soon? What are some of those? What does interviewing or interrogation look like 5 to 10 years from now?
You know, because of you, I was introduced to the Innocence Project people, and they told me about the advocate program they want to establish in states. And I have to teach about having a third party present to not make that an issue, how not to make that an issue. So I actually teach about that. I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see a third party when it comes to a vulnerable person, whether they have mental health, intellectual developmental disability, or being young, being, juvenile age or under the age. We're still not there where we can convince under the age of 25, but at least under the age of 18 or 17 in some states, like mine.
I think that's a good point. I've seen that. I was just on some calls the last couple of weeks with states and different states trying to look at policies for people, vulnerable people, to get an advocate of some sort. And what's crazy is in the US, we're kind of behind the eight ball on that compared to some other countries.
Oh, yeah. In the UK, they call it something else, but they have a third party advocate for individuals there
Right. Yeah.
that helps
So,
them with legal standing in that.
but I think you're right. It's making sure investigators are trained on how to handle that kind of a unique circumstance when you've got somebody in the room. To wrap us up, any last message that if you got the platform of a whole bunch of investigators listening, and we've got a ton of great content today, so thank you for the time. We could probably talk for hours and hours about this, but if there's one thing that you want investigators to walk away with on how they can just be better communicators or better at their job, what would you want to leave them with?
Seek out communication. My partner hates it, but one of the ways I do it, if I'm in the elevator in my building, I'll start talking. I'll start, hey, what's on that floor? Hey, what's your name? Or wherever you're at, just engage in conversation. You will become a lot more comfortable in that space, and it'll make it better for your job, especially if you're an interviewer or a law enforcement officer or whatever it may be. It'll give you that comfortability to say, you know what? I can approach that person and talk to them instead of it being forced. You're strained. You're like, oh my God, I gotta talk to somebody. Oh, you know, get out of your comfort zone and have that genuine curiosity for people.
I like that. We had one of our recent episodes, Mark Anderson was on, and he talked about the same habits you have at work, bring them at home, the good habits, bring them at home, but be you, right? Be you everywhere. So if you start to become normal and routine, just talking to people everywhere, it'll make that professional piece so much easier. That's good. That's great feedback. Well, thank you, sir. I know you got a lot of craziness going on, so thanks for giving me and all our listeners some time. Stay safe out there, and thanks for what you're doing for the law enforcement space. And thank you guys all for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told. To help more listeners find our show, please provide us a rating, give us a follow, and share this episode with your colleagues. For the latest news and to engage with our guests, follow Truth Be Told on your favorite social media apps. And don't forget, we are available on all major platforms, including Apple, Spotify, and watch a video of this episode on YouTube. On behalf of our guests and valued sponsors, thanks again for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told.